Welcome back to another video for Race Manager. Today I'd like to focus on developers for the most part, but really there's a use case in here for end users or admins that would like to do custom rotations, until which time we have graphical interface to build custom rotations yourself. So stay tuned if you're interested in that piece. But let's say you've been using Race Manager for a while. You'd like to extend it. You'd like to see it do something it doesn't currently do. It is an open source project. We'd be happy to accept a pull request for you. That could just be something simple like a tweak to the UI, or it could be something more complicated like the backend server itself. But today I just want to focus on the APIs for the most part, the ability to interact with the server the same way the UI is doing it for the most part, right? It's a pretty modern application. And so basically what that means is the front of the application is separated from the back end of the application. So what's running in the browser is a React application, and it is talking to a Java server on the back end that publishes a RESTful API. So let's dive into what that is, right? So the way we aim to support this for now is through a graphical user interface called Postman. Once you understand the APIs, you can call them, from your favorite tool. We don't have any separate documentation at this point, so Postman does a pretty good job of doing that for us. Also provides an easy interface for those that are a little less familiar, for just sort of point and click interactions with the API. So how do you get started with this? Well, first thing you want to do is go to postman.com, download the latest version for your computer, install that, and then jump back over here. So inside the main source code repository here on GitHub, you'll see there is a dedicated Postman folder. If you go inside of this, you're going to find two files. One's a collection file and the other's an environment file. Let's go ahead and download these two files. Easiest way to do that, probably just open each one of these up in a new tab. And if you're on one of the newer UI for GitLab, you'll actually see a new download button. Otherwise, you can hit this raw button. Gives you just a raw version of this page where it can do a save page as, and just save it as the file name that it actually suggests, or the one that you see up here in the browser, basically, right? Once you have both of these files downloaded locally, go ahead and jump back over to Postman. And now we're going to import those files so we have something to work with. You're going to see on the left-hand side, there's the collections button, there's the environments button, which matches the two files we're going to download. So the easiest way to get in here is hit this import button, and then either drag those files in here or hit the upload files button. Wherever you downloaded these on your computer, go ahead and you can do multi-select or do it one at a time, up to you. You'll see that it's going to import these. One is a collection, one is an environment, so that lines up. Okay, and you can see on the bottom right that it says those have been imported. So the two places you're going to interact with these are on the left-hand side and the top right-hand side. So right now we're on the collections. And if you drop this down, you're going to see a series of folders in here. Before we do this, we're going to jump back over here onto the top right, and you're going to see that it says no environment. We're going to go ahead and drop this down, and now you'd see one called Race Manager based on the file that we imported. So go ahead and click that. If I pause for a second, just talk about what the environment itself is. This is like environment variables that you might find on your computer, right? So same thing, you're allowed to define these inside of Postman. Then it's useful for sharing collections with other people, right? So if I click on this button, you can get a preview of what this looks like. And if you need to edit these values, you can click this edit button, and now you'll be in here, right? So we've basically defined about 6 or 7 variables here. And these are the ones that the Postman collections that we'll interact with over here are looking for, so that you don't have to manually change these on your particular computer, right? So for example, if you change the port during your setup from 8080 to, I don't know, 8000, you could change that value here, save it, and then you wouldn't have to change any of these other values in here, right? So it's an easy way to share and configure the APIs, right? So gotta go ahead and close that and jump back over here. So this is Race Manager itself. This is the collection for interacting with the APIs. You can see, just like we talked about in previous demo videos, this is kind of broken into the admin side and the public side just to make it easier. And so if you drop this down, we've also subfoldered all the collections based on basically the domain object that you're interested in, right? So if you're interested in getting a list of sessions or rotations, right, you can kind of find those pretty easily, right? So let's go ahead and just drop down sessions for now, and you're going to see there's a variety of options, right? And if we did the same thing for rotations, you'd see there's a variety of options. Generally, this follows pretty conventional HTTP standards, RESTful interface. By that, I basically mean you can see these are HTTP verbs. So you have post, put, delete. So these are what you're going to use. Post is going to be for creating new objects in the system. Put would be to update an object that already exists, and delete, of course, is to remove that object from the system. Most of the objects in Race Manager are soft deleted. Basically means that they no longer show up in the UI but they are still in the database. And that's partly because let's say you delete a session, you may also have rotations and historical race data that goes with that. So we don't want to blow up that data. So we just mark this for basically no future use and no display within the UI for the most part, right? So anyway, so let's talk about each one of these, right? So sessions, pretty understandable. We've talked about that in the previous videos. Game server. So this folder is related to the Automobilista 2 game server specifically. So remember, Race Manager is managing that for you, and it's wrapping that engine so you can make proxy or pass-through calls to APIs that exist on the game server. I'll show that in a minute. And you can also do things like trigger a start, a stop, or a restart on the game server, which is basically like what happens when you hit that update button after you've changed the rotation, for example. The rotations, again, you can use this post call to create a custom rotation. You can have it automatically generate one like the button in the UI does. And if you don't pass it a name, then it will generate a name for you, just a UUID. If you do want to give it a custom name, which probably makes sense given that you might want to find this later or be able to reference them from the UI, that's probably the option you want there. And then when you create a new rotation, it's not activated. By default, it is just a rotation that exists in the system. So just like you hit that update button after you select it, that's the equivalent of this particular call right here. And then again, we have the ability to delete rotations. Um, this is the server config, and usually it's not something you're going to necessarily touch, but when you first set up the system, these are the APIs that get called for that specific piece. These are the events. So remember, as we saw in the console, we are collecting data from the race server, on every 1 second interval. If you needed to process it manually for whatever reason, as long as the server was running, you could hit this and it would just do an immediate collection. But generally, this is not needed. I'm going to come back to this sample custom rotations here in a minute, and let's just, that was a good tour of the admin UIs, right? So these are the APIs that generally fall behind a /admin in the URL, and the ones that generally require authentication, basically a user credential in order to access these, right? So these are not going to be available on the front end of the website where people are just browsing that race data, right? So this allows you to sort of share out the race statistics with your friends without necessarily letting them edit the server settings or configuration itself, right? So on the public side, these are basically all the ones that are powering, what you see on the front end of the website, where anybody can sort of access things. This is where we're pulling data. You can't generally make changes to these. These are like read-only views of data. So the security on these is, relaxed here. So again, we have sessions. So just like we had sessions under here, you'd see that in this sessions folder, we have basically destructive actions, right? Or basically ones that can create data, update data, or delete data. Any that are just pure read data are generally on the public side. So, for example, let's go ahead and run one of these. If I click on session get details, up in this address bar, you're going to see some of those variables that we actually noticed right earlier on in the environment. So that's where these come into play. So now that you've edited in here, if you needed to, or if you left it by default and don't need to change it, you'd see that those get created in here. And the way these are generally set up is um, they will build on top of each other. So for example, if you called this right now, it's expecting there to be a last generated session ID. We haven't actually created one in Postman, so this is going to fail because it doesn't know what that is. But if I was to come in here, for example, and let's just go ahead and show one. So jump back to the actual UI for a second. Okay, so we're back on the Race Manager UI. Basically, just wanted to show that right now we still have only 3 sessions in here, right? We have the F1 League, we have the Saturday night race, and the Friday night race. Let's go ahead and show what it looks like, right? So if we did this add session right here, gave it a name, this is essentially calling that same API, adding that session into the backend server. We could do that directly through Postman, which is basically what the same kind of request that the front end is doing itself. So if we jump back over to Postman, we'll go to this create new session, right? And then you'd see that it's actually calling a /admin URL /race session, right? So again, all of these admin or secured endpoints are behind a /admin URL. It's another way to understand that when you're looking at the request. But generally speaking, you're going to put data into the body of the request for any sort of manipulation event, like creating a new one. And there's examples that are already included. Of requests that can be run automatically, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and leave the default. You could do the same thing. You could change this name, and if if you wanted to assign specific rotations in here, you could do that here. You could also just create the series without this, leave it empty as it is here, and then you could manually add from the UI. Important point here. So again, these are authenticated requests, and I haven't actually logged in yet. So let me show you how to do that, right? So um, you actually have to click on the admin folder. This is the easiest way to do it. Since all of these requests are lumped underneath this top level admin folder, by clicking directly on the admin folder, you'll get this tab right here, this admin tab. You can see it defaults to the authorization tab. And down in here, you're going to see that but it's requesting a bearer token. This is just a type of string that contains a credential that lets you into the system. It's not your admin credential, it comes from your admin credential. And that token value, once you've logged in through Postman, will get set into a variable called JWT token. So there's really nothing to change here. I'm just trying to show you that basically because it's set at this admin folder, you don't need to reapply this at any one of the requests that are underneath these folders. It cascades down. So how do we do this to begin with? Well, at the very, under the public, at the very bottom, you're going to see authenticate. And here we're going to go click on the body. You see it's calling the authenticate endpoint. Whatever your username and password is, so here for my demo example, it's admin12345. You would update this with whatever your information is. And before we run this actual authenticate call, there is one more piece of that, and that is this last option down here, this get XSRF token endpoint. What this is the general interactions with the APIs are coming from the website site itself, since that's the most common way people would interact with it. So for added security, the website is generating a token to verify that the request has come from the website itself. That same security is applied here. And so this is kind of the same endpoint that can be called by the front end to get that token. So we'll click on this. Simply, you can see that it's just simply hitting the top level /API URL of the server itself. We do this, and it would echo the same thing that you would see in the browser. So just welcome to Race Manager. This request alone sort of initializes this token. It sets it into a variable. Now, with that variable running, you'd see that we can go ahead and run this authentication request. Now, if you didn't do this token, you would get an error something like what you see down below here. It's a 403, it's forbidden. So it's basically saying, I don't know who this is, and no token exists for me to validate this request. So by doing this first, now you'll see that this actually won't happen. So again, just change these pieces of data to whatever yours are, go ahead and hit send. And there you go. So this is a successful request. We know that because it says right here, 200, okay. Otherwise, it would be some probably red text that showed like a 500 or maybe a 404, like a file not found, something along those lines. And this is the response body that came back to us from the server itself. And so what you get back from this first call is the actual token that we talked about earlier, right? So this token contains details that the server uses to know who is trying to access it. And this gets basically set in the browser, and then with all the web requests that happen until the admin logs out, this token would be used, right? But again, this is only for the admin endpoints, is where the tokens are required. So we have our token now. And just to go back and show you this, if I click here, I mentioned earlier that the values would get updated when you ran requests. So this is an example of that. So we have the JWT token. This variable is used in all those requests that live under that admin bucket. And you'd see that this value here matches the one that we see down here, right? And that would be the same for any of these values, basically just mostly these last 4 or 5 that we're going to experiment with, right? So now we're logged in. Now we can actually go back to the admin session and create that session we talked about in the beginning. So I'm just going to go ahead and submit the best race series ever. I'll hit the send button. And here we go. You see successfully created race session. So again, successful request, 200 OK. We get back the payload, which is generally the object that has been created for us with the ID. And so now you can see that these are the names, right? So if we actually pop back over to the UI at this point, and we do a little refresh on the screen, back to the manage, drop this down, and there we go. There is the same thing we could have created through the UI, now created programmatically through the API. Let's just go ahead and jump back over to this. So now we see that we have created a new one. Let's show for an example what it looks like to update an existing one, right? So we say best race series ever, and I'll say best race series ever 2. We'll go ahead and send this through. Now I want to call out, you see that it actually failed. Well, why did it fail? Because we've basically gone to the equivalent of a new screen within the UI. We're trying to do another action. We've already done a manipulation action. That was the creation of the session. That means the previous token that we generated for ourselves for the secure request is no longer valid, right? So technically, before any one of these admin level operations, you're going to run this uh, XSRF token endpoint. You get your updated token, come back. It's still the 2. We'll go ahead and hit send, and you'll see that this 403 would turn now to a 200 OK, and you'll see that it says successfully updated race session, right? So if we jump back here, we do that refresh again. Actually, we can even see it from this leaderboard. There we go. We see our update, right? So I'm not going to do this for every single one. I think you get the point, but this is generally how you interact with the Postman collection and the APIs. On the public side, there are some interesting pass-through ones that I'll point out. So, for example, these are pass-through in the sense that they call the Automobilista 2 internal server to get back real-time data from the server. So, when a new Automobilista 2 release comes out, maybe there's new tracks, maybe there's new liveries. We don't want to hard code those into the application, so we want to get those in real time so that it works with whatever version you have. So, for example, if I just wanted to get all the weather options that existed in the server for rotations, I could pick this first one, hit send, and this will call the Automobilista 2 server, get us back that data, right? And then we're displaying it like as an array of data that you see here, right? So these are all the different weather conditions and the values that you could also use in like rotation files, for example, right? So you could do that for tracks, liveries, vehicles, the classes. You can also get the current game server status. And so obviously, if the game server's down and race manager's up, then basically it won't work, right? Because we're talking through to the Automobilista 2 server. Generally, this isn't a problem for you because Automobilista 2 does wrap that server and it will start it, stop it for you as needed. And so generally, you no longer have to start that, and you shouldn't start that dedicated server on your own when you're using Race Manager at this point. So I do want to just quickly jump back to, I promised that I would talk a little bit about custom rotations. And so remember, through the UI today, if you come to the managed server side for an admin, we have this option to add a rotation. I mentioned that this is limited right now in the sense that we started with just fun rotation generation. So you kind of just don't know what you're going to get. We tend to use this quite a bit. Like you come in, you generate a rotation, and then it's like an equal playing field for anybody to just jump in and start playing that night. So random car, random weather, random tracks. We do generally turn off carts ourselves. We don't enjoy those so much. But you have some options for configuring like the carts and the number of races. Other than that, it's automatically generated for you, right? So before long, we do hope to add, if there's enough interest, a UI to build out a rotation graphically so that it's much easier to do. But you can still do it today, and you can do it through the Postman collection or through an API call. And we've included a whole bunch as examples. They do need to follow the format that you see in here. They aren't exactly the rotation format that Automobilista 2 wants. When you make this request to the server, it will transform your request into the right setup, but we need to have the right setup for our database, and then it will pass through and write out the rotations in the format that AM2 expects in that directory, right? So um, what we've included here, and we plan to include more and more over time, and potentially even build a share UI around this. But we imagine that people would really want to be able to share the fun rotations that they've created with each other. So we have actually done some research, found a great blog that I linked to in the documentation that basically outlines how to try to recreate F1 series of the past, everything from 1966 all the way through 2022. And so we've basically just implemented rotations for each one of those as spec'd out by the reference that I'll link to the documentation. So if you're interested in one of these, you'll be able to go ahead and create this and add it to the system yourself, right? So the way we have these set up for you already is that you come in, you can click on the body, and you can see we give it the name that you see on the left-hand side, just obviously a little prettier. And then we've set up the vehicle class that goes along with that based on the recommendations. And by default, we always just set these at clear rather, but you can change weather slots if you want. These are the default ones at the top. You could also include an override down in the rotation level. This is all following the standard convention that already exists in AM2, so we haven't invented anything new here. And now you see the rotation. So for this 1966, 1967 F1 vintage, you'll see that there's what, four tracks that have been recommended, and these are the track keys that you have to look up using one of those other API calls, for example. But anyway, these are all pre-filled out. So if we want to add these, we can simply click on the one that we're all that interested in. I am going to jump down to the XRF token. I'm going to go ahead and run that because this is a manipulation request. We are adding a new rotation. So if I was to come in now and go ahead and say send on this 1966, 67, you will see that it's a 200 OK, and we got a unique ID back for the one that we just generated. So if I jump back into Race Manager, go ahead and do this refresh one more time. And now under the rotation, we only had this Formula Ultimate before, but now you'd also see we have that 1966, 67 F1. So what we do on our real server, we can load this up pretty quickly. It's just create this F1 League session and then just go along to the API and run as many of these as you want to get the different F1 series that you're interested in pre-populated in here. Simply select the one you want, hit that update server, and then to be racing that particular rotation. And it's a great way to get started and a lot of really, really fun F1 races to play around with in there. So hope you like it. That's the tour of the API. We'll continue to improve this over time as we go along, but I'm always open to suggestions. Thanks for watching.